fasting has become this massive, more mainstream, talked about thing. We were talking about this before. There's all these big fasting apps with millions of users. There's tons of fasting books. There's different types of fasting. There's water-only fasting that you do for a few days. There's, just very calorie-restricted fasting. There's the time-restricted fasting. There's the fasting mimicking diet. There are all these different types of fasting. Can you break down maybe the pros and cons of some of these that you've seen?
Yeah.
And which one is most effective for us? Or is it something we just need to try and see what works for us?
I would definitely say no to your last question, right?
Okay.
So yeah, it's not about trying because it can do. Fasting is like eating, right?
Okay.
It can do a lot of good for you or a lot of damage, right? And so I would say that you're starting to see lots of clinical studies and preclinical, so animal studies, clinical, and at a certain point you put it together and you get a good sense for what works and what doesn't work. It doesn't mean it's not by no means final, but you get a good sense. So I would say if you look at the daily type of fast, what clearly works and is not associated with any negative effects is 12 hours, right?
12 hours
12
fasting
hours of time restricted eating,
a day.
right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Don't eat for 12 hours.
Yeah, say 8 a.m., 8 p.m., stop eating at 8 p.m. and no more food until next day, 8 a.m., okay?
Okay.
So that, I would say, I've never seen a negative study about this.
So if you wake up, you eat between 8 and 8, you're good.
Yeah.
Don't eat before 8 a.m., don't eat after 8 p.m.
Yeah, so that's already a very good one. Another one, now, if you go to 16 hours, right, say 16-8, you're starting to see lots of benefit, but you start seeing lots of problems, right?
What type of problems?
Well, first of all, gallstone formation, right? Gallbladder operation, gallstone formation, they double between the people that fast for 10 hours and people that fast for 18 hours, right?
Really?
Yeah. So just to give you one. Another one, study after study after study, and we've done the same study, but somebody has published it before. We got a chance to, people that skip breakfast. Most people that go 16 hours will skip breakfast. And the breakfast skippers tend to live less, have more cardiovascular disease, have more disease in general, right?
Okay, wait. Let me break this down. So for years, I was always eating breakfast because I love breakfast. Then I heard about intermittent fasting where it's like skip the breakfast and eat at lunch and do the 8-hour window, right? But you're telling me now that the studies are showing that those that skip breakfast are living less and having more problems than if you eat breakfast and eat within the 12-hour window.
No, if you just eat breakfast.
Just
right?
eat breakfast.
So eat breakfast against not eating breakfast, right?
Gotcha. So just eating breakfast. What are the studies showing now between not eating breakfast and eating breakfast?
Yeah, so the people that skip breakfast, they're living shorter with more diseases.
Really?
And there's study after study after study. It's not one,
Really?
It's very consistent.
Is this for people, over 60 years old or
No.
20?
Yeah, this is just looking at people, did they have breakfast or not? And then follow, let's say for 20 years, the mortality of those that historically never eat breakfast.
Are there other conditions around that where they were overstressed or they were, didn't have good relationships or?
They adjust for most of it, but it's possible. But my point to those that say, well, maybe it's something else, it's not the breakfast skipping. Yeah, I say, but if it's so beneficial to go 16 hours a day of fasting, why doesn't it at least bring you back to normal life, right?
Interesting.
So
why is breakfast so important?
Well, nobody knows, but it could be that it's setting up the metabolism, right? It's setting up the metabolism to be like we were discussing earlier, right? So if it's affecting the way you burn fat, if it's affecting the way your insulin functions, et cetera, eventually you could be more prone to, insulin resistance, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, et cetera. You don't need very much. And also the heart, right? So it could be the ketone bodies, this continuous high level. So when you fast, these ketone bodies, this is what the word ketogenesis comes from. These byproducts of fat are going up in the bloodstream, right? And also fatty acids, right? The fat themselves. And this can alter the way your heart works and the way your brain works. So we don't know, but it is possible that by having lots of that all the time, now some of the systems now develop problems and not improve.
So it's okay if you're doing like a week-long fast or a 3-day fast to obviously skip the food or have less food during breakfast, but you're saying skipping breakfast on a consistent basis has proven that it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously nobody did an experiment where they say, well, let's randomize that 10,000 people and you skip breakfast and you don't, and let's wait 30 years, right? They cannot be done. But it's epidemiological study. So, you look at the databases and you say the breakfast keepers, are they doing better or worse than the non-breakfast keepers? And they're doing consistently worse.
Wow.
Right? And this is why you want to say, okay, if you want to do 16 hours, talk to a doctor, fine. It could help you, do it for a month or two, but then find something else. Yeah, find something else, because it does have a beneficial effect. It can have it could do lots of good things, but then eventually you don't want to keep it for 20 years. Yeah. So that's the sort of daily stuff. Once you get to alternate day fasting and all that, I think it's just crazy stuff. It's just, I always say I have a difficult time at asking people to go from 4 coffees to 3 coffees a day, right? So if you go to someone and say, oh no, from now on, beside the potential, long-term problems that we just discussed, right? So if 16 hours does that, what could happen if you don't eat every other day, right? But beside that, just the feasibility, the fact that people are actually going to do this, it's just extremely unlikely. You're looking at one person out of 100, maybe they can not eat every other day.
Right. What about one day a month? If you're like, I'm going to do a 24-hour fast, 1 day a month. Is that
and nobody knows, right? Nobody knows. The problem with that, and this is why my lab and my group has always focused on this, developing this fasting mimicking diet, is that in the one day you don't quite get into the ketogenic mode, right?
In 1 day of fasting.
Yeah, in 1 day of fasting. So you struggle because most people would not view that positively. I mean, tomorrow or next week I'm not gonna have a day where I don't eat, right? So it's a struggle, and also you don't quite get. So you're hungry for that 24 hours. And you don't quite get into a starvation response mode, right? Yeah, that's why we're saying probably the system. If you look at our history, right, most likely we can't go back in time, but so most likely in the summers we had the job to get fat, right?
Fill up for winter.
Lots of fruit, honey, whatever you can get your hands on. Eat as much as possible. And then the diabetes and pre-diabetes, the insulin resistance that then leads to diabetes, so insulin doesn't work as well, it was probably part of that process of making you store fat. Put away as much fat as possible. So now, this can be activated any time in the year, right? Because people overeat all year long. And so what we see now clinically is that when you do, let's say, 5 days of a fasting mimicking diet, or it could even be water-only fasting, you unlock that. You seem to unlock that mode where, and this is why the doctor that I was telling you about, you see him even using the longevity diet, but he's still not quite losing that insulin resistance until he does the fasting mimicking diet.
Really?
That changes, and you clearly see the slope of the glucose levels curve, and so probably.
And the fasting mimicking diet is around like 300 to 500 calories a day type of thing. Is that right? Or
no, the fasting mimicking diet is the one for regular people is 1,100 calories on day 1, and then it goes to 800 calories on day 2, 3, 4, 5. Right.
Okay, gotcha. So it's 800 calories for the last 4 days. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so then the possibility is, considering that over 70% of Americans are either overweight or obese. Now we're saying if you intervened a couple of times a year at least, and you remind the system we are not in summer mode, okay, let's go into winter mode. Let's go into, let's burn these fats because, you know, we're no longer having to store them. Yeah, so that could be the trick of the 5 days versus, let's say, 1 day a month.
Interesting.
Which may keep the system confused and not sure, did we reach another phase here? Do we need to go now into a fat burning mode, or can we stay in the fat accumulating mode? You know?
So what's the difference between having the fasting mimicking process of 5 days, 800 to 1,000 calories, versus water only for 5 days?
If I've done it, I can tell you the difference. I've done it one time.
With water only for 5 days?
And I remember every day of it. Right?
The pain of it, you mean, or what?
Yeah, to me, it was near torture.
Really?
And we knew that was true when we did that I was telling you about the clinical trial, the first clinical trial in 2009, I think it was here at USC, on cancer patients. And we thought, somebody has cancer, they're not going to argue with water-only fasting. They're going to do it, right?
Right, yeah.
We were sure, the oncologists were sure, let's go, let's do it. Nobody wanted to do it, right? Wow. So this is why we went to the government and said, we would like to develop a fasting mimicking diet, you know, for cancer patients. That's where it comes from, right? So it comes from the refusal of cancer patients to...
We're like, I'm going to eat no matter what. Well, then...
To do, yeah. It's just it's a safety issue. There's lots of things in food that are important to maintain high enough glucose level, high enough blood pressure, et cetera, et cetera. So once you remove it, I think, you know, people can do water-only fasting, but probably in a specialized clinic, you know.
Right.
Yeah. So if you go to a place,
it is effective.
It is effective.
If you're in a specialized clinic and you have...
Yeah. But watch out, though, right? Because, again, as we were saying earlier, the devil is in detail. And if you go long enough, right, especially if you're extreme and long, then the body goes into another response, which is thrifty mode. So the body
Thrifty mode, so it stops burning.
Yeah. Then the body...
It keeps the fat.
Let's say you go a couple of weeks without food at all. The body now has to intervene and say, we're going to be in trouble soon enough, right?
So we're going to keep that. We're not going to burn this.
We're not going to burn.
Wow.
And so now you could have, and we know this from long-term calorie restriction studies, you could have probably, nobody's ever figured out what it is, but it's called epigenetic change. Mm-hmm. So there's a switch that turns on and say, okay, from now on, and maybe for years, I'm now in a saving mode. I'm going to save energy. So now if you, and this is why the technology is so important, right? So you want to do all the things that we just talked about, and you want to avoid all the bad things, right? Mm-hmm. You don't want to get into thrifty mode. You want to get into the ketogenic mode. You want to burn start burning the fat, keep that long term, and avoid the side effects. So all of this, even though people think it's an old thing, people used to do it. You see how the purpose, it was not to get to 110 years of age healthy back 2,000 years ago. The purpose, if you were lucky, is make it to 50 years of age and have children. So now everything changed, right? So now we can't just fast the old ways.
Right.
We have to know, we have to be respectful of the tradition and what we learn from all these old practices, but at the same time, we have to bring in the science, the clinical trials, and say, okay, how do where do they match? You know, what's the common denominator between all these things? You know, I think it's always good to have a reductionist approach and think of the human being as a plane or a car, you know, something that is complicated, sophisticated and complicated. You know, how do you? I always use it, for example, when people ask, should I go running, 20 miles a day, or should I never run? Well, I always say, well, if you keep your car in the garage all the time, not good, right? If you drive your car all the time, not good either.